So recently I was actually asked to be on the Dr. Phil show because one of the producers, they seen a TikTok of mine where I had like this awkward interaction between a cashier and the customer where, you know, like the little iPad flip where they ask you for a tip. I just made a little funny skit about it. So one of the producers actually seen it and asked me to be on the show, and I agree. So this is me reacting to that episode about tipping.
In the US, it's kind of an unwritten rule that people tip between 15 and 20%. Now, some of our guests today say 100% of Americans should tip, especially since federal laws currently set the minimum base wage for tipped employees at what? What do you think it is? I'll just tell you, it's $2.13. And that number hasn't changed since 1991.
While that's not completely true across all states, there are a lot of states out there, California included, where you actually get paid the minimum wage, plus you get tips on top of that. I actually have a family member who works in the service industry, and he was saying that starting off, he was getting paid anywhere between $30 to $35 an hour as a server. That's higher than most jobs out there. Like when I started my job as a registered nurse, I was getting paid like $40 an hour. So for a server to make $35 an hour, including tips, that's a pretty sweet deal.
It's shocking video of a customer throwing soup into a restaurant manager's face.
She claims that it was so hot, it actually melted the top of the takeout container.
Surveillance video shows the customer pointing to the melted plastic lid.
Now that's just plain disrespectful. No person deserves to get like freaking hot soup thrown in their face. Like she definitely does not get paid enough to deal with stuff like this. So that's just messed up. That's like harassment right there. I think that's actually assault.
While many people in the service industry work incredibly hard, racking up long hours, my first guest, Walter, says he will never dig deep in his pockets to give a tip.
I'm going to be tackling a pretty controversial topic today. I hate tipping. I hate tipping servers. I hate tipping drivers. I hate tipping hairdressers. I hate employers who rely on tipping to pay their staff. I hate people who give tips. I hate people who get tips. I hate people who defend tipping as a practice. I hate the entire institution of tipping, and I've decided to just stop participating in it. And if I don't participate in tipping, then I'm some kind of psychopath. In fact, I don't even know what good service is supposed to mean. Seriously, what is good service? All I give a about is getting the food to my table.
I can already feel you guys.
Well, if you can't afford to tip, you can't afford to go out to eat. Well, of course I can afford to pay an additional 15% on top of what I already paid. The thing is that I think it's but people have this weird moral investment into tipping. Every time somebody doesn't tip, it feels like it makes the freaking news.
Of course, he's like very polarizing on one like certain end of the spectrum about tipping. He's totally against tipping. I actually met him behind stage. Also behind stage, like a lot of the producers were talking to us, trying to figure out like, hey, you gotta try to make this like entertaining, try to go over the top. This guy kind of got pointed out kind of as the villain. So he was kind of like the star of the show, I would say. So he was very polarizing in the sense of like, I hate tipping, I'm 100% against it. And you guys will find out why.
So what's your objection to it? It's obviously philosophical. It's not financial. It's philosophical, right?
It's both, actually. I think the entire system is corrupt, and I think that tipping should be outlawed. I think that any wage model that enables tipping should be abolished immediately. That's the philosophical side. The financial side is that I love saving 20% on my restaurant tabs.
But if someone is there taking care of you and helping you at $2.13 an hour, do you feel bad for them? Do you say that's just their sob story?
Yeah,
They
no.
can go get another job.
I don't. If you aren't making enough money, it's your boss's fault if they aren't paying you enough. Because if someone is paying their employee $2.13 an hour and the customer doesn't tip them, who's the bad guy? The guy who paid $15 for a $15 meal instead of $20? Or the boss who's paying the $2 an hour?
I actually kind of agree with him in this sense because like tipping is kind of viewed more poorly on like the customer themselves because you kind of feel bad for the service worker or the server or whatnot. And I feel like it should be pitted on more on the company itself or the boss. And then people who are in the restaurant industry are saying like, man, like if I raise my prices or whatnot, like I'll get less orders or whatever it is or less get customers. I really like to beg to differ for that because even if you were to raise your prices like 10% 10% across the board, 15 or even 20% across the board, as we've seen in like the past 2 years during like inflation and COVID and stuff like that, people are still eating out. It really has not changed one thing or another. So I think it's just kind of messed up for the customer to feel guilty that I'm paying this person's salary, right? I know it's not the server's fault, but they are in an industry where a big portion of their income or revenue or whatever it is, it's coming from the customer itself. So who do you point the fingers at, right? Is it the boss that like underpays their staff? Or is it that actual server who feels entitled for a tip no matter what, whether or not they're doing a good job or not?
What's your attitude about tips in general?
Well, I've been doing it for a very long time, and I don't expect anybody to tip. I've seen everything. But yeah, I do believe that if somebody gives you great service and they're there and making you feel good and you and your family have a great time.
Yo, didn't he just say that you shouldn't have to tip? But he's like, if you do a good job, you feel like you should be compensated. So essentially you're saying that you should be tipped for good work.
I think it's a good system. I think people that aren't happy with the service, they just don't have to tip. And like personally, I enjoy tipping people 30 to 40%.
I don't know if that's cap or not, 30 to 40%. Sheesh, man, that's a lot of money, you know? Of course, there's been times where I feel like person like way above and beyond, you feel just good doing it, but just to do 30 to 40% just as a standard, I feel like that's a bit cap just for the show.
It feels good. It's a good exchange when somebody truly gives me kindness and makes me feel good that day.
I think if the restaurant industry were to change and to pay us more, that'd be great. I just want to pay my bills, right? I want to afford to do the things that I enjoy doing. It does kind of suck that it falls to the consumer in order to help me do that, right? But this is the system we live in. And you're not doing anything, Walter, to change the system. You're taking it out on me. You could not go out to eat, cook a little ramen noodle at home, right? And then this wouldn't be an issue. We wouldn't be here, right? You wouldn't get to meet.
So this is like one of the biggest like arguments against tipping is that if you can't afford tipping, like why don't you just stay at home, right? But this does not make no logical sense to me personally, because like if you pay for a service, of course when you go out, you expect you pay for your meal. That's what you can't afford, right? What if you can't afford a tip? Like what if you can't afford an extra 20%? Is that right for the person just to stay home and not go out to eat? Like, is it right that a person cannot pay their hospital bills, but they have to go to the ER anyways, right? Of course, that's two different extremes of going to the hospital and getting a meal, but that's the problem that I'm talking about here. Like some people like her believe that you should not be going out to eat unless you can't afford a tip. See, that's like where the entitlement really kind of like pisses me off, because I feel like that's not what tips were meant to be for, you know? Tips were meant to be like, dude, you did a good job, so I'm gonna reward you for that. Not so like, you need to pay me extra no matter what, even whether or not I did good or not, you know, and no matter what, I should be getting tipped no matter what. I think that's the connotation where most people don't like the concept of tipping. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, but I think that's what the attitude that makes a lot of people kind of turned off about the situation about tipping.
Or I could go out to eat and I could just not tip. That's always an option. That people will always say that. They're like, well, if you can't afford to tip, you can't afford to go out to eat. I'm like, I can afford it, but I just don't want to participate in it, because by paying money, I'm keeping alive a system that I want completely eliminated. And people say, well, for now. And I'm like, until when? How about I just stop tipping now?
I actually disagree with you.
I don't know. I think that's actually kind of agreeable, because if you keep paying into the system of tipping, like there's really nothing that stops the business owner and be like, why should I pay this person more? Because they're already getting their tips from the customers, right? Like, why should I compensate my servers more when they get paid enough? But if they were not getting any tips, would the servers themselves probably complain more, or would they probably start quitting their jobs to find other type of jobs that pay much better? I think it will cause more pressure on the business owner to actually pay their servers a livable wage, or just compensate them fairly for what their job entails, right? That's what I think the pressure should be at.
So what do you guys think about this? Who's got an opinion of this? Because I want to know. Back over here.
There was a server at a restaurant that I went to with my best friend, and I watched him like play with this kid. It was like a 3-year-old kid. It was so fussy, but that guy learned how to calm that kid down, and literally in, I kid you not, like a minute, drew a portrait of this kid and gave it to him. So I next time I went to that restaurant, I told him, I'm gonna give you a good tip because you're phenomenal. You didn't have to do that, but you did, and I want you to be rewarded for that.
What you want to say?
So the thing is that she was like, the next time I come to this restaurant, I will tip you big. But why not just tip the guy while you're at the restaurant? That's what I didn't get. But also the guy, he was providing a service for like another customer. So hopefully that customer rewarded him generously, because in that instance, yeah, he kind of went above and beyond. Like he didn't have to draw a portrait of this little kid to like calm them down or whatnot. But I just kind of find it kind of funny where she was like, yeah, next time I see you, I'm gonna tip you big. But when does that next time actually be, right?
Okay.
Our job is like very hard to do, and like before I even ever had a job, like I will never tip because I never had the money like to give them. Now since I have a job, I always make sure to give out like at least over $5 tip.
I actually was talking to some of my family members and like friends, like their concept of tipping. Like this guy, he always says that he gives at least a $5 tip. I had a friend of mine that was saying that I feel bad just tipping like $1 or $2, because in this day and age, $1 or $2 really isn't gonna get you far. So he kind of has this same mentality of giving like a minimum of at least a $5 tip, just because you could do more things for $5. I think that's where this kid is coming from. And also, since this kid also worked in the service industry, a lot of people that I talk to that work in the service industry, they tend to tip much higher. I believe that due to the fact that they kind of have this bias because they can actually relate to the position like the other person's in. Like they worked in the service industry, they serve, they deal with customers. So I feel like people who were like service workers before, they tend to tip way more generously compared to people who are not.
Yeah, why do you do it?
It's because they deserve it, honestly. If they're having a good day, bad day, they honestly still deserve it. This is like a reward that they deserve.
You chased somebody down one time.
See, this is kind of like getting like a trophy for participation, right? If they're having a good day, bad day, whatever it is, they just still deserve it. Like I honestly do not believe in that type of crap. I feel like if you deserve a tip, you deserve a tip, right? Like if you didn't do anything special, if you did not tend to like your customers should like a regular server, like why do you deserve a tip, right? I understand that there are gonna be times where you're understaffed, and you're probably gonna work harder than you actually are. And those times, yes, I feel like you're going over like above and beyond because you're like stretched very thin. But just to say that someone deserves it just because they deserve it, that does not make sense, right? Like everybody who works a job, they deserve whatever the market is willing to pay. I think that type of nonsense is just, he deserves it. Good day, bad day, whatever. He deserves a reward. Does everybody deserve a reward? No, man.
You chased somebody down one time.
I did that. That
like
was
a $400 bill?
It was a $400 check.
Good, sir.
And yeah, I chased them down. They were foreigners and they didn't understand the culture, so I explained it to them. And then they ended up tipping me. And that situation was just kind of a dream because I got to actually speak my voice. But every other situation, the thousands of times I've gotten stiffed, I just eat the negative and move on to the next table.
I don't know how is that the dream of like chasing down foreigners who are like tourists in this country and being like, yo, you gotta tip me, man. Like it's a $400 bill. You gotta tip me at least like $80 to $100 or whatever it is. I feel like that's highly disrespectful. And that kind of just, people who are just visiting this country are probably like, this is why probably Americans are so freaking rude, man. Like, and he says that even after that incident or even other incidents, he just moves forward and just continues about his day. Like, why didn't you do that rather than like chasing somebody down? Like, if someone were to chase me down for a tip, I'm like, dude, maybe they didn't want to leave a tip, man. Like, I feel like that's highly unprofessional, especially from like a wait staff from probably a high-end restaurant. If like the bill is like $400, so I'm just like, this just rubs me the wrong way.
I believe in a meritocracy. I would not want my tips built in because then it's flat. And I would want to get out there and distinguish myself and really do a great job and think, all right, I'm gonna outshine everybody and get bigger tips. I would hate it if there was a ceiling on my tips. I would much rather get it as a function of performance. Isn't that a better deal?
This is where the problem lies, because I think a lot of people think when they are actually tipping that the money actually goes to the server. More times than not, it actually doesn't, because a lot of places nowadays, they split their tips amongst all the servers. Sometimes they split it even with the people who are cooking in the back and stuff like that, like people who are having other roles inside the restaurant. The actual action of tipping does not have the same effect as intended as I think most people would think, because if there's a server who's giving you like excellent service, like, yes, I want to give you the money. You want to give them the money, right? You don't want to give the next guy the money or the other server who's not really doing well or people in the back. Like maybe you do, but still like it doesn't have less than intended effect than what you would originally think.
I'm curious about how this goes for you. Do you take women or do you go on dates to restaurants?
Yeah, my girlfriend knows that I don't tip.
How does that go? That first conversation on the date?
It's exactly like this. I'm very straightforward about it.
It would be a deal breaker for me, my friend.
That's fine. I don't.
So I actually talked to my wife about this, like whether or not it would have been like a red flag if she would date me, whether or not I would tip. For me, she said that she honestly really didn't care because she's an immigrant and she came from another country where tipping is really not an issue over there. So she really didn't actually start tipping until she actually met me. And she always thought it was kind of odd, like the American tipping culture. And it's really not a big issue. So what do you guys think? What do you ladies think? Like, would it be a red flag if a guy would not tip? I feel like there's a lot of like cultural backgrounds and things like that. Like, I honestly don't think that should be a big deal, but what do you guys think?
Once you flip the screen around, it's gonna show you how much you would want to tip. Sure, no problem. Dang, 20, 25, 30% options only. How'd I put down no tip? No tip? No one wants to work. A tip is the least that you can do. Well, maybe your boss should just pay you more instead of relying on tips. Then why aren't tips included in the price in the first place? To be honest, I really don't know. It's just the way we do things here. It would be nice if you leave a tip. And to answer your original question, I have no clue of how to put a $0 tip. Man, why does tipping gotta be so weird?
Well, Nam is a finance content creator.
That actually is not like my best video. I think there was like some typos in the video itself. So it was kind of funny to me that they actually found this video and they actually presented it like amongst the audience. So this is my like little 5 minutes of fame.
And in digital sales, and Bryce, who is a second-year medical student who also owns an online coffee retail shop. Now, they both say that tipping in this country has gone way too far. What do you guys mean by that?
Yeah, I think the real challenge is that it's 2022 tipping culture that's gone too far. Whereas you go to a restaurant and you sit down and someone provides you good service, that's fine. But nowadays, if you go to a coffee shop or the simplest thing, they'll flip around an iPad for you and say, hey, would you like to tip 15% because I grabbed your coffee off a counter? And it just seems too far.
Everybody expects to be tipped for something, is what you're saying.
It's too much stress and too much pressure tip, and it kind of takes away that meritocracy part that you were talking about where you should just be tipping for good service.
Yeah. What do you think?
I really agree with Bryce right there. I actually met this guy backstage and we were kind of like brainstorming what to say or whatnot. But there is like a lot of this like social anxiety, especially if you have social anxiety, when someone flips over a screen and is just giving you like a blank stare, like, hey, are you gonna tip me or not? Automatically, people just put tips so they just don't feel weird, or there's people behind them like judging them like whether or not they tip. But there are a bunch of people like myself, or there's other people like, yo, I'm just picking up my order, bro. I'm just gonna take it to go, put 0 tip. But I can see why there are a lot of people out there that like feel like the pressure of like, crap, man, I need to tip something. If not, I feel weird or being judged.
I felt the same way as Bryce, because actually I was at a farmer's market the other day and they had one of those tablets as well. And I was just buying some jam and she flipped around the tablet and asked for tips. And the jam's already pre-made and she literally just handed me the jam.
I've heard a lot of people talking about that.
I think that's kind of like the problem. I really can't blame the businesses because the businesses themselves, like if people wanted to tip, that's more revenue for them, right? So from a business standpoint, it would just make sense just to have the option there. Of course, I think it's kind of personally annoying, especially for industries that normally did not receive tips. Like, you know, the normal stuff, such as like in restaurants, maybe your bellhop, you would like give them a tip or something like that. But for like going to like a farmer's market where they just like handed you the stuff that they made previously, asking for a tip is really odd to me. But also, a lot of these business owners really don't even know how to remove that function. So they kind of just leave it as is, or they just too busy to call up Square or to actually get it fixed. So they kind of just leave it in there. But I do believe it is going way overboard.
Which should make you deliriously happy.
I love it. I love it.
But I mean, do y'all feel that way? Has it gone too far?
My sister does hair, so we've had this conversation several times because as a hairdresser, she feels she should get a tip. But if I'm going to a funeral or somewhere and I need my hair done and I only have enough to pay the price, do I not get my hair done because I can't tip you?
See, this kind of goes back into like the guilt part of it. Like the other girl said that if you can't afford tip, you shouldn't be going out. Like this lady was basically saying kind of almost the same thing. Like if I can't afford to tip this hairdresser, should I not be getting my hair done or whatnot, right? She was talking about a hairdresser. I think one of the issues of like hairdressers and barbers receiving tips, I think that a lot of them are like 1099 employees. Some of them actually just rent out the chair and they actually charge how much they want to charge, right? So they're kind of like a business owner. So in that sense, if you wanted to get paid more, you could control your prices, how much you want to pay or how much you want to charge. But if you're working for like a bigger business or something like that and you pay a flat fee, then in that case, I kind of get why like a tipping is a little bit more like like warranted compared to if you just rented a chair and you charge your own prices. Because if you're an actual business owner, you should be charging how much you want to charge, right?
What if I only have enough of what you're charging me?
I understand what you're saying, but you have to remember whenever you get a bill at a restaurant, speaking as a waitress, you get a bill, what's listed there is the food, the things that you've consumed, right? It's the price of the things that you've consumed. And then the tip is the price for the service. You wouldn't be able to consume those things if we weren't here saying, hey.
That is.
So the problem with that, I say like, because tipping now is more so of a percentage rather than like a flat rate. There was so much things that I wanted to talk about on this episode, but I only had like one line, right? But the problem I see is that like, okay, what if you go to a restaurant, like go to like Nobu or something like that, and your bill is $500. If you give the server a 20% tip, that's like $100, right? But imagine you go to like a Buffalo Wild Wings where your bill is like $50. A 20% tip is like, what, $10 there in that instance, right? Like they're basically doing the same job, right? They're still giving you the service, they're making you recommendations, they're bringing out the food for you, they're refilling your water, getting you alcohol, whatever it is. Would it be fair for someone who is working at a high-end restaurant to actually get a $100 tip compared to someone who's working at like a $2 sign restaurant or $1 sign restaurant, like 5 or 10 bucks compared to like $100? I don't think that's personally fair. And plus, should there be a cap on that? Because the bigger the bill, the more that you would actually feel like you need to tip. If it's like a $100 bill, if it's a 20% tip, you're tipping no less than like $20 compared to like a meal that costs, say, $10 and you're tipping $1 or $2 or whatnot. That's such a large percentage, right? No matter what, if the person gives good service, I'm gonna tip them $10 or 20 bucks or whatever. Because she's basically saying you're tipping for service. But most people don't tip just for service. They're tipping a percentage of the actual cost of the meal.
Such a lie, and I'm so tired of hearing it. Oh my God. You think that waiters are the only people who work in the restaurant? They are not the only labor overhead. There's the dishwasher, there's the cook, there's the host, there's a million other people working in the restaurant besides the waiter.
Yeah.
They put their labor into the food. The labor overhead of the waiter can also be included there. And here's the thing is that if I see $20...
So I'm just like sitting there like, yo, this guy is going off, man.
So it's a relationship. It's a dialogue. There are two people involved. There's the patron and there's the server. In my domain, in the world of etiquette, it's what are the skills that distinguish you from another human being? And that is really your ability to be kind, to be respectful, to have a good attitude, and to show courtesy to another person. And so when you are taking it upon yourself to go into an establishment and have a request, rather, it's always a request, a service to be provided, then the assumption is, because we're good, kind, courteous, gracious people, that there, is a payment involved that's commensurate upon the level of service provided, which means that if you are taking a job,
she's just like, yo, what this lady talking about?
You have a responsibility. And I want to see somebody who comes up and shows up with a smile, respect, things like integrity and excellence. Those all kind of make up the big picture of the experience that the patron has.
I do think you get what you give, too.
So the etiquette lady, I honestly don't think, I didn't even know what her role was. She was just basically saying like, I expect someone to be nice. You should just be a nice person in general. I'm like, dude, that's like just human characteristics. You should just be nice to people. But why should you be like compensated so much more because you're just being nice to people? Like, is that like a reward in itself nowadays? I feel like in America, it feels like you gotta be rewarded for almost everything. And I feel like if you're just nice, just be nice and be a good person. That's usually what it is. But why do you have to get compensated so much more rather than most jobs that don't get compensated for just doing their job, right? Like you never tip like a Foot Locker worker who spent like 2 hours trying to find the right shoe for you, do you? Or you tip out your janitor for taking out the trash on time? You normally don't. But why is that? There's like only certain industries where you would tip. And I feel like it's so messed up that like the federal government and stuff like that, the lobbyists allow this to go on for so long that actual restaurant servers have to get paid like less than minimum wage because they get paid in tips. I feel like that's almost extortion, right? Everybody should just get paid for what what their market value should be. I feel like the tipping culture should be do away with. I honestly like the transparency. If you go to a place, you just pay for what it is and you get service for what it is. I've been to countries all around the world where there's like no tipping culture, and it's kind of disrespectful to actually tip some places because they're like, why are you tipping me? Like, I'm doing my own job. Like, they'll feel sorry for me or whatever. But people can't come and say that, yeah, they're getting paid a livable wage, but there are places like in the US as well where people are getting minimum wage plus on top of tips, and they're getting paid for an entry-level job much more than other jobs that require some like college education, right? So I can't blame that, but I like the transparency of just, this is the price, pay for the price, and that's pretty much it.
I mean, there's reciprocity, and Robin knows sometimes we'll be in a restaurant and it seems like it takes forever to get service. I'll always say when they finally get there, I say, because you kind of been watching them and you can tell they're working twice as many tables as they probably should be. It's just saying, well, it's about time. You can just say, boy, they should put you on skates tonight. They got you doing a lot, right?
Yeah.
I tell you what, that person is going to really take care of you because, like somebody says, hey, they get it. I'm doing the best I can.
I wonder if he's saying like the customer taking care of the server, because in that instance, that's kind of out of pity, right? Because you kind of feel bad for the person, so you feel like they deserve more. Like, I can understand it, like they're working more tables than they should, but shouldn't that be like the owner's responsibility? But like, so since you're waiting like 2 times as much like tables, you should get 2 times as much pay. That's what I kind of feel like, rather than feeling like sorry for someone, like, man, they're like way understaffed and stuff like that, so I gotta pay them more, right? It's still that guilt aspect where you feel like you have to do something out of that guilt or pity or whatever it is.
Yeah, it makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, huge difference.
Yeah, I thought it was worth having a discussion about this, and thank you guys for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And talking about it.
So that's essentially like my 2 seconds of fame. I had like one line. There was so much more that I wanted to talk about tipping, because I'd done like a bunch of research on the topic, like how it originated, because tipping was really never the norm, but it kind of became the norm in the last century or whatnot. But that was basically my experience on Dr. Phil. Would I do it again? Probably not, because I spent like 8 hours of my day just waiting just to be on a TV show for like a few minutes. But that was a show. It was a good experience overall.